We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
On a humid summer's day in Houston, President John F. Kennedy approached the podium and delivered a speech that not only changed the course of the United States, but changed the course of the world and mankind as we know it today.
Then we must be bold. The exploration of space will go ahead, and it is one of the great adventures of all time.
Liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The president's challenge is the beginning of a collaboration that brings over 400,000 people together.
We have felt the ground shake and the air shattered by the testing of a Saturn C-1 booster rocket. We shall send to the moon a giant rocket and then return it safely to Earth.
This project was bigger, faster, and more audacious than anything in history. America was not only in the midst of a red-hot Cold War with Russia, but in a battle with the skeptics who said it couldn't be done.
So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are. In this decade, we shall make up and move ahead.
70 years later, another American had a dream. A dream to build a monument celebrating the greatest technological achievement in the history of mankind. A dream celebrating Apollo 11. On May 25th, 1961, President Kennedy addressed a joint session of Congress that set the stage for a new and exciting time for America and the world.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
His challenge to the government, the scientific and military communities, and most importantly, the American people, was enthusiastically accepted with moxie and ingenuity that characterized our great nation. America was hell-bent on pushing the boundaries of all known science and technology to send men to the moon. 4 years earlier, in October 1957, Russia successfully launched Sputnik, the world's first man-made satellite. Sputnik, which means satellite in Russian, circled the Earth once every hour and 36 minutes. The U.S. and the world were caught off guard by Russia's achievement, and while the Russians claimed the Sputnik mission was purely scientific in nature, the race for geopolitical dominance between America and Russia was too great for then-President Dwight D. Eisenhower to ignore. He had no choice but to launch the United States into the space race. That same year, he sent a letter to Congress that called for a civilian agency to spearhead America's efforts. This agency would come to be known as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. The end of President Eisenhower's term and the beginning of President Kennedy's term saw great leaps in our space program. From 1958 to 1963, the Mercury mission successfully sent the first Americans into space.
102, 101, oxygen 78, 100, amp 27. Roger, loud and clear.
20 unmanned missions and 7 piloted missions were completed, including John Glenn orbiting the Earth at 5 miles per second.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Oh, that view is tremendous. You have a go, at least 7 orbits. Godspeed, John Glenn.
In my judgment, this nation's orbital pioneering in space is of such historic stature, representing as it does a vast advancement that will profoundly influence the progress of all mankind.
Glenn spent 4 hours, 56 minutes in space and made it around the world 3 times. Mercury had met its 3 objectives. Put a human in orbit around Earth, see how a human being's body reacts to being in space, and bringing the astronauts and ship safely back to Earth. 2 years after the conclusion of Project Mercury, Project Gemini was launched. The goal of these 10 missions was to test the skills and endurance of the astronauts and practice maneuvers for the upcoming Apollo moon voyage. These were the first astronauts to pioneer both the spacewalk and spacecraft docking procedures.
This is the greatest experience. It's just tremendous.
Gemini 7 launched December 4th, 1965, manned by Frank Borman and Jim Lovell. Gemini 7 would spend 14 days in space, the longest of all Gemini missions.
Oh, I was quite excited to be in Gemini 7. I was with Frank Borman. We were selected and found out that it was a 2-week mission. We were trying to figure out how we were going to last in 2 weeks, because if you see that spacecraft, you know that it's very, very small. It's like 2 weeks in the men's room, to tell you the truth. Physically, we had to be pretty well evaluated before the flight. They did everything possible to see what 2 weeks will do to the human body in zero gravity. We had about 15 different experiments that we were going to work on over the period of time. And then we watched Gemini 6 slowly come up as we approached, and they moved right in with us eventually, which gave us good confidence about the rendezvous techniques were pretty good for in Apollo then. We watched them deorbit, we stayed up there for another day or so.
Neil Armstrong and David Scott would crew the Gemini 8 mission, which launched in March the next year. They performed multiple rendezvous and docking tests and successfully executed a spacewalk. Gemini 10 launched July 1966, led by John Young and Michael Collins, conducted more rendezvous and docking tests. The final flight of the Gemini program, Gemini 12, would send Jim Lovell back into space. Together, he and Buzz Aldrin conducted multiple spacewalks and maneuvering procedures.
I think 12 was important to redefine the rendezvous, which of course is important for the Apollo program, but also important for future flights when we wanted to go outside the spacecraft. We had our spacecraft here, the Gina spacecraft, we were already docked. Then Buzz got out and actually went around to the Agena. Then after that, he moved around to the rear end of the spacecraft. He spent about well over 2 hours. That satisfied NASA that we had accomplished that particular maneuver. We used at that time a swimming pool, and we practiced using that to how Buzz Aldrin could work outside successfully out of the spacecraft. And so that was one of the major reasons why I think 12 was important. We spent an awful long time in NASA preparing for what we were going to do. So really, as we were doing it, it was like a textbook, you know, we're going up doing this, okay, next we do that, next we do this. And of course, if something went wrong, we would then do some creative thinking to how to overcome, you know, the problem. In the 2 Gemini flights, well, of course, Gemini 12 was more complicated than Gemini 7. Everything seemed to work as we wanted it to.
Project Gemini was the bridge between the Mercury project and the Apollo missions. With the last Gemini mission in 1966, the stage was set for the final march to the moon. President Kennedy said America would go to the moon before the end of the decade, and although he didn't live to see that proclamation fulfilled, the Apollo program rapidly took shape. A bigger, more powerful rocket was needed to deliver astronauts beyond Earth's orbit and propel them towards the moon. "1967 looked to be a promising year for NASA. The first mission of the year, Apollo 1, was set to go. The crew climbed to the top of the rocket and entered the command module at 1 p.m. Minor problems plagued the test from the beginning. The astronauts, hours behind schedule, had grown frustrated. At 5:40 p.m., they encountered yet another issue. This time, it was with the communication equipment.
Okay, we got word from the communications people that we will very possibly lose a commander on liftoff in the present configuration. You're off a week. Say again? Who's transmitting? This will fly in clock off. Yeah, well, my VHF TR is turned off. I shouldn't be transmitting at all. Okay, you're pretty good. Hey, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between three buildings?
At 6:31 p.m., tragedy struck.
Almighty God, we commend the soul of our brother departed, and we commit his body to the ground, earth to earth.
Fire raged through the pure oxygen atmosphere of the command module. The crew, locked inside, had no chance of escape. The astronauts of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, all perished. In the quest for space dominance, much was learned and progress gained not only through scientific advancements of that era, but also through the tragedies and technical setbacks of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. Even though the space program was tragically hit, NASA moved forward. The American people believed in Apollo, and that belief never wavered. NASA continued to step up. For the astronauts of the Apollo program, it was time to go and time to conquer. Apollo missions 2 through 6 were unmanned and included safety and test procedures designed to avoid another tragedy. Crewed by Walter Schirra, R. Walter Cunningham, and Don Easley, Apollo 7 would be the first chance for NASA to prove the new procedures worked.
Ignition. Charge.
Apollo 7 successfully proved the resilience and readiness of the command and service module. It also featured a first for America, a live broadcast from space.
Looks good. I can see Wally Hamlin now. Don has a smile on his face, and there's Walt.
Apollo 8 astronauts, Commander Frank Borman, Command Module Pilot James Lovell, and Lunar Module Pilot William Anders set many firsts. First to leave Earth's orbit, reach and orbit the moon and return. First to witness and photograph an Earthrise. First crewed launch of the Saturn V rocket.
We have ignition. All engines are running. We have liftoff. We have liftoff at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The tower has been cleared. The tower has been cleared.
And first human spaceflight from the Kennedy Space Center. Apollo 8 took 68 hours to reach the moon, then orbited the moon 10 times during 20 hours of flight. The astronauts made a televised Christmas Eve broadcast, taking turns reading from the Book of Genesis. At the time, it was the most watched TV program ever.
For all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light.
Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders made Time magazine's cover as Men of the Year 1968.
Actually, what I thought about at the time is, we're actually going to do this. They're just serious about sending us to the moon. So from then on, it was all sort of mechanical. And then we had certain things to do at a certain time, and that's what we did. We did not see the moon as we approached it, and we went into the moon's orbit and the dark side. Our computer said we are now in lunar orbit. Didn't see a thing because we were on the dark side of the moon. And suddenly the sunlight came starting to shine on the peaks of the craters, and we looked down there, and we were like three school kids looking in a candy store window, looking at all those ancient old craters. First time, of course, man had seen the far side of the moon. And then we looked out into the darkness of the sky and looked back, and we could see the Earth. Very small, illuminated body. So I could put my thumb up and hide the Earth completely.
Man's fascination with the moon reached fever pitch with the unveiling of Apollo 11. Since the first Mercury missions in 1958, every switch thrown, every rocket launched,
We have liftoff.
and every astronaut who walked in space led to this moment.
Okay, all flight controllers, retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Econ. Go. Surgeon. Go.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
As a sculptor, doing a project like the Apollo 11 project was a real honor. You realize these are men that first went to the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
July 20th, 1969, an iconic moment that changed the world forever. Neil Armstrong taking mankind's first steps on the moon. Now a documentary filmmaker is looking to memorialize the event ahead of the 50th anniversary. Joining us right now is Stephen Barber, the CEO and director of Vanilla Fire Productions, the man behind the push for this statue. Stephen, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Marie. It's great to be here. Good morning.
Tell us how it all came about.
Well, you know, I shot a movie in the Capitol about 10 years ago on the Montford Marines, and when they were getting their medals, I had seen this Jack Swikert statue created by a gentleman named George Lundeen. I was always blown away by it. I mean, it's the most beautiful statue I've ever seen. When did you first decide you were going to be a sculptor?
Well, I always wanted to be an artist, and so as a kid I drew a lot of pictures.
From drawing pictures as a young man to becoming one of the country's top sculptors, George Lundeen, along with his brother Mark and fellow sculptor Joey Boehner, were commissioned to create a 7-foot-tall bronze monument dedicated to the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11.
When you get a commission like this, you're doing a very historic event and you're trying to tell some parts of that story. So when we do this, we want to make sure that we do a great representation of not only the spacesuit, which we had, but the people and the expressions. And so we studied these guys, and thank goodness there were so many great photographs of these guys from Apollo 11. We had photographs of Collins, we had photographs of Armstrong and Buzz. Great photographs because even back in 1968, 1969, as they went through the training, they always had a camera on them.
Born and raised in Ohio, Armstrong's love of flying pushed him to get his pilot's license at the age of 15. The former Eagle Scout went on to study engineering at Purdue University, but left early to enlist in the Navy, where he flew 78 combat missions during the Korean War. After the war, he completed his degree and joined NASA as an engineer and test pilot. Armstrong was later selected for the astronaut program and was mission commander for 2 missions, Gemini 8 and Apollo 11, where he would be the first man to walk on the moon. The son of an Army general, Michael Collins was born in Rome, Italy, where his father was stationed. He followed his family's military tradition and graduated from the academy at West Point. Inspired by John Glenn's Mercury 6 flight,
All systems are go.
Collins applied to NASA but was passed over for selection. He returned to the Air Force and served as a test pilot. The experience paid off as he applied again and was accepted in 1963. He flew with Gemini 10 and Apollo 11 as the command module pilot during Armstrong and Aldrin's moonwalk. Edwin Buzz Aldrin was raised in Montclair, New Jersey. Buzz graduated high school a year early and went on to the academy at West Point, where he graduated 3rd in his class. He also served as a combat aviator during the Korean War and was decorated with the Distinguished Flying Cross for his service.
I'm Lieutenant Aldrin. I just got down off my 56th mission. I'm stationed here at an advanced base in Korea, flying with the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing.
When the war ended, he attended MIT and earned his doctorate, the first astronaut to do so. And he was affectionately named Dr. Rendezvous based on the title of his thesis. Aldrin flew with Gemini 12, where he was the first astronaut to successfully complete a spacewalk. He later piloted Apollo 11 and was the second man to grace the lunar surface.
What we're looking at, George, is the 3 clay models that you made for the Apollo 11. Tell me a little bit about the process of those, and why do you start with small clay models?
When we started the piece on the Apollo 11, we took some very small pieces that were only about 8 inches tall. They were Gumby-like figures, and so we'd put those in place. Then we went to a little larger scale, and finally we went up to the 24-inch piece. And in that one, we were actually able to do some pretty good portrait heads on them, get a lot of the same detail on the spacesuit, and also on the expression of both their faces and hands, because you have to realize that hands are also very expressive.
George Lundeen and his brother Mark own and operate Lundeen Sculpture, where the idea for the monument started to take shape.
This project started with a call I got from kind of a crazy guy out in Los Angeles that said he had a dream of making these astronauts for the 50th anniversary. And he asked if we would be interested in working on it. And I said, of course we would. This is a terrific event. And so we started with a small model. And from the small model, we then threw it back to Stephen, our fellow out in LA. And he spent months trying to find funding for it, trying to get somebody interested in it. And finally we found this great company called Rocket Mortgage, and it fit perfectly. And so since that time, we've been going 100 miles an hour to get this thing done in time.
My name is Mark Lundeen, and we are sitting in my studio in beautiful downtown Loveland, Colorado.
Loveland, Colorado, in the last 50 years has become known as the sculpture capital of the United States.
The first step was we were contacted by Stephen C. Barber, a filmmaker out of Hollywood, California. He saw one of our statues, I believe in Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C., and he contacted us about creating the Apollo 11 crew for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. I became a sculptor about 40 years ago. I was passing through town, stopped in to see my brother George, who was also a sculptor, and never left. Yeah, I love working with my hands. I love being creative. Jack Swigert statue. That project came to us through the state of Colorado. That was for the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. We have that in our studio right now, and we're using that as a reference for these astronauts. Fortunately, NASA sent us one of the Apollo suits to use as a model. And what I have in my hand is just oil-based clay, and we're putting it over our foam armature that we've already sculpted out a little bit. With this clay, we'll be able to put in all the really fine detail work that we need to do on the piece.
This is one of the fittings that goes on like that. We'll put those on like that, put them on like that.
I started out doing sports figures. First sports figure that I did was of Casey at the bat, and I did that in 1988. It ended up to be about 14 feet tall. I come from a family of artists. My older brother George is a sculptor, my sister-in-law Bets is a sculptor, my sister-in-law Cammie is a sculptor, my mother-in-law Mary is a sculptor. I have a cousin Annie who's a sculptor. There's a half a dozen of us in the family that do this for a living.
Joey Boehner joined the Lundins after high school, and through their guidance, evolved into an essential artistic asset to the company and the monument.
After high school, I got a job with Mark Lundin. I've been working here on and off since 2007. Growing up, the space program was always fascinating to me. So when we first started designing the maquette, we know we have 3 figures that we need to depict in the same composition. Neil naturally got the center spot because he was the first man on the moon. Buzz, we gave the American flag to, since he's the one that stuck it into the ground on the moon. And then Collins is obviously an integral part of the mission, and sometimes he gets a little forgotten, so we gave him a watch. A nice watch. The other 2 don't have a nice watch. We don't really decide who's gonna do what on the project. Everyone sort of naturally gravitates towards their strengths. I got to work on a commission with Mark George, their sister-in-law Bets Lundin, who's also an amazing sculptor, and their cousin Anne LaRose. And we did a commission of 14 Stations of the Cross for a Catholic retreat in Nebraska. And that took us about 2 years.
This was the very first model that we came up with, how we have all of these small figures, and then we were able to put them together with that cross and get an idea of the composition and how we wanted this piece to look. This piece was 16.5 feet tall after we blew it up.
50 years earlier, filmmaker Stephen C. Barber was fortunate enough to meet the 4th man to touch down on the lunar surface. Apollo 15 Commander James Irwin. Commander Irwin left an indelible effect on Mr. Barber. He not only shared stories about NASA and his time on the moon, but his company, High Flight, a Christian-based youth organization. Their message, Jesus walking on Earth was more important than man walking on the moon. Fast forward 50 years, and the spirit of Commander Irwin helped move Mr. Barber to conceive the Apollo 11 project and lead right to Loveland, Colorado, and the brothers Lundin.
My name is Olivia Lundin. I'm George and Mark's niece. Yeah, I run the office and I do all the bookkeeping and necessary communications with customers. I got involved about a year ago when George's secretary left the company, and but I've always kind of been involved. My family has been a part of the sculpture industry in Loveland since the 70s, and my mom is also a sculptor, and I love being a part of it. A lot of these sculptures were sculpted several years ago, so anytime someone comes in interested in one of them, I have to make sure that we're able to recreate it, just so I'm not selling the last one that ever existed. But they're sculpted by my uncles George and Mark and my Aunt Cammie, primarily in these galleries. I heard about the Apollo 11 project from Stephen C. Barber. He gave us a call about 49 years after the astronauts landed on the moon and said, we should have a sculpture just like your Jack Swigert out at Kennedy Space Center. George was happy to be a part of it, and so was Mark and Joey Boehner. We decided let's start working on it because it was going to be a big project that needed to be done quickly in less than a year. We work hard to have quality work, and you'll know that there's several artisans involved, not just the sculptor.
Hey everybody, my name is filmmaker Stephen Barber with Vanilla Fire Productions. I'm in beautiful Loveland, Colorado. Today is February 11th. I'm with George Lundeen. George is one of the great master sculptors in America, and we're working on an incredible project. He's going to give us a tour of the shop right now. George, nice to meet you again.
Nice to meet you.
Haven't seen you about 6 months.
Great to see you again.
Tell me a little
Thanks for
bit
getting this project together.
Yeah, we're working on the crew of Apollo 11, the astronaut monument, to be taken down to the Kennedy Space Center and NASA for the July event for the 50th anniversary of the greatest technological achievement in the history of mankind, that of course the moon landing. George, tell me a little bit about your shop, how long you've been here, how long you've been a sculptor, and tell us about Lundeen.
I've been a sculptor, Stephen, for 50 years now. I've been in this particular location just over 40 years. We've got the first building here, built it into the studio. We used to have a house on the top of it. We since have moved out west of town to raise some kids, but we now have 3 buildings right downtown Loveland, and I'll give you a quick tour of how we make everything.
I would love that. Come on guys, follow us.
This piece is a commission we're doing for the University of Illinois. It's a well-known linebacker named Dick Butkus. He's probably the most famous linebacker, I would assume, in the history of football so far. So this is the very start of it here. Then I go to a little bit larger model, but here you can see where we're starting to get a lot more detail on it, and we're refining the whole piece. We'll actually make these, and we'll make them in bronze, just the way we do the big ones.
Most everything on a sculpture from start to finish is hand done one way or another. Nothing's done by robotics, nothing's automatic. Even if we use tools, we use a lot of electric tools, a lot of air-powered tools. From the time we start working with the clay until we mold the piece, take it to the foundry, they put it through the lost wax casting process. Everything is done by hand. We not only wanted to make a great depiction of what these guys looked like, but we wanted to have a little story involved with it, which is why we added the American flag to it and have them looking up as though they're looking up at the moon.
After liftoff, Apollo 11 orbited the Earth once before they started the 3-day, 238,000-mile journey to the moon. After several months into the build of the Apollo 11 monument, a rare opportunity arose for filmmaker Stephen C. Barber. The second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, accepted his invitation to the Lundin studio in Loveland, Colorado. The city of Loveland was thrilled to host one of the greatest Americans in history. Over 60 friends and family gathered at the studio, anticipating his arrival. Although the challenges of building the statue pale in comparison to landing a man on the moon, to have someone of his stature there was indeed profound. Buzz was gracious and kind, taking time to admire the monument while sharing his adventures in space. The experience was truly magical and memorable for everyone.
Everybody look right here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go. Righto. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Roger. Copy. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Eagle, Houston, you're go for landing. Over. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle.
Man on the moon. Ooh. Oh, boy.
Thank you. You're looking good here.
Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Post control, both autos, engine engine command override off. Engine arm off. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, 20 Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
About 49 years after the moon landing, an idea was brought forward by Stephen Barber. He said, guys, there's something amazing happening here. We want to work with some artists to create a beautiful monument to recognize the astronauts and put it at the Kennedy Space Center. And so we were able to accomplish that. I'll tell you, initially, we started thinking, okay, what's this all about? What does this mean? We're in the mortgage and finance business. This is an incredible statue that will be down in Florida. But as we thought more about it, we thought about what that entire event represented for the United States of America.
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
When it comes to innovation and people working together and accomplishing a bigger mission, it lined up perfectly with who we are as a company. Of course, we're Rocket Mortgage, so there's that natural connection, but it was really more about our culture and what we believe in and having a big vision and working together to accomplish great things, and then thinking about Apollo meant to the United States of America and that entire space program. And so that's really where we got excited about participating. 9 years ago, we were able to pull off something that's never been done before. College basketball game at the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier, and it was probably one of the greatest events I've ever been to. We've had people from Michigan State, people from North Carolina there. President Barack Obama was there, and it was a magical night. The aircraft carrier was lit up, and it was on Veterans Day to recognize all the great service from our U.S. service men and women.
It's amazing. It's incredible.
It's something to remember.
I'm super excited.
The whole thing is awesome.
It means a lot.
Expect to see a lot of VIPs.
We want to say God bless them and thank them for what they do for us each and every day.
I like to say I didn't know if it was possible.
It's going to be Michigan State against North Carolina.
It should be very exciting.
These guys are all finished. We're going to load them up tomorrow in a specially made container. They'll be on a tour for about a week until they get to the Kennedy Space Center. But yes, sir, they're all finished.
So months and months of planning and hard work were coming to an end. The statue was ready for transportation to Florida. It was in Colorado. One of the things that we looked at and thought about was, how do we take this monument and statue before it finds its beautiful home at the Kennedy Space Center? How can we show it to more and more people? And so we developed literally a transport vehicle in which we took the monument. It left Colorado, it traveled through the Midwest, it stopped in Cincinnati, it came here to Detroit, where we had school children, our team members with the company were able to enjoy it, and ultimately it traveled back down to Florida to its final resting place at the Kennedy Space Center. So it was a great opportunity to let Americans see the beautiful work that was done, celebrating one of the greatest feats in our history before it found its permanent home down in Florida.
So we're about 9 miles out. The crew of Apollo 11 is heading to the Kennedy Space Center. This is one of the most, the proudest day of my life. Well, this is it. There they go. Take care, Big Wayne. The crew of Apollo 11 is on the property at the Kennedy Space Center. It's heading home for the next several years. I'm filmmaker Stephen C. Barber. Ow!
The Kennedy Space Center remains a prime attraction for space enthusiasts. Visitors from all over the world flock to Florida to experience everything from space training simulations to rocket launches. One of the most notable attractions is the Moon Tree Garden. It features 12 trees, which are direct descendants of seeds taken to the moon by Apollo 14 astronaut Stuart Roosa. The 12 trees symbolize the 12 crewed Apollo flights and surround the Apollo 11 monument, which was loaned to the Kennedy Space Center by Rocket Mortgage.
This journey started actually well over 9 months ago when we partnered with George Lundeen and his team to bring the statue, the eagle has landed, to life.
3, 2, 1, lift off.
Today, getting off the bus to finally see it in its resting spot at the Moon Tree Garden is awe-inspiring. I mean, the amount of detail that went into the development and the sculpture as it was being built, down to how it's literally placed, where our astronauts are gazing up to right over at the launch pads, where they'll be able to see future space travel take off, is just it's absolutely awe-inspiring and amazing to see.
Charlie, what do you think? What do you think of the statue?
Mark, that's fantastic, beautiful. You did a wonderful job.
Well, I'll do you better.
Yeah, wonderful.
I want people to look at this monument and see these 3 guys that had the courage to jump on top of a rocket, fly all the way up there to the moon, and walk around and come back, because at best that was a 50-50 proposition. And all of the people that worked on that team of the Apollo 11, and there must have been thousands of them, were so excited about it, and at the same time, I can't imagine the anxiety that they were full of for those many days that those guys were up in space.
When millions of people view this sculpture over the next however many years, I hope they just take away the inspiration that I felt working on the piece.
We were under a very tight deadline for this. Start to finish on this project was going to be about 6 months. Most of the time when I'm asked to do a sculpture, I usually ask for 9 months to a year to do 1 figure, let alone 3. But fortunately, we had 3 sculptors on this job, and we worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 3 months.
A project like this always takes a great team to put it all together. You have to have the right people making the sculpture. You've got to get the design. You have to have somebody out there to cast the piece for you and finish it. And most importantly, you have to have a partner that's willing to step up to the plate, and that's where we found this great partner in Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage. They've stepped up and they've said anything we need to do, we've got it. So that has really been terrific.
So going back about 18 months ago, we were approached with the opportunity to partner with a wide array of really talented folks, from the Kennedy Space Center and NASA, and our sculptors and our partner Stephen Barber, and have a chance to look at bringing a beautiful monument to life and celebrate one of the greatest feats in American, if not the world's history, in which we just celebrated this past year with landing on the moon. And so over the last 18 months have been an absolute pleasure and a road well traveled in helping bring that dream to reality of being able to celebrate this down at the Kennedy Space Center.
In the spring of 1961, President Kennedy came to Rice University with a dream so bold that nobody dared say no, and nobody did. In the history of man, nothing had ever been achieved so quickly, efficiently, and precisely. 400,000 people came together in perfect harmony to take man to another world. 60 years later, the spirit of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo are still alive and bringing a new generation together to honor President Kennedy's vision by launching us into a new space race. This race is a continued collaboration with millions of people around the world taking us to new heights. Whether it be for a mission to the moon, Mars, or to build a monument, when we're all focused and sharing the same dream, failure is simply not an option. In our time on this planet, we must always dream big. We must always have a vision, and we must always be bold.